why don't we pause there on the subject of that terrifying experience that you had? You were there in what capacity, and where were you? What did you see?
Okay, I was a film courier as a summer job.
You were how old at the time?
I would be a teenager, I don't know, 16, 17, maybe 18. And I was a film courier for NBC News Chicago. And at the time, television was not digital. It was done with actual film footage, which you had to pick up and deliver to have them process the film and then edit it in for the news that night. And so I was the only film courier who was not a copper. The rest were all moonlighting policemen. So, that's why I'd seen the other riots before, and then I was sent into Marquette Park, and the coppers who worked for NBC told me, okay, do this way, do that way. This is how you drive in. This is what you do with your car. Make sure there's always a car length between you and the car in front of you. If you have to drive on the sidewalk, go for it. All these kind of sort of rules of the road. And so what I did is I ended up on whatever the south end of Marquette Park was, whatever that street is, like 63rd or something. I'm not sure what the street is. And I remember clearly there were a whole bunch of coppers there along the sidewalk. And then all like tons of Lithuanian kids, teenagers at the bungalows. And there was a classic Chicago bungalows. All the windows were sparkling clean, and the lawns were perfectly maintained, and all the bushes were perfect. And and then behind me was the park, Market Park itself, and that would be the eastern end as well. So it would be the southeastern end of the park. And King had just come through, and it was furious. And that the police were overwhelmingly white, but that they pretty much had it under control. But it was a very tense time. But just to look at the just the screaming hatred of the kids on the sidewalk against the bungalows was one thing, but to see literally rampaging mob, as I had said before, running and changing direction like an antelope. I had never seen, human beings act that way, like ducks or antelopes or whatever, that they just would go together. And they were just like running wild in the park, and basically the police had contained them. But they were things that, I saw one copper on a motorcycle get knocked off the motorcycle with a brick that somebody had thrown him, and the rest of the coppers just came and took whoever was into the doorway and, meat tenderized them for a while. Others, that was sort of the introduction of the long sort of fiberglass baton. They moved from the nightstick, and they worked it. I mean, they worked it, but it was high tension. And so I was sitting on a motorcycle of one of the cops. I was not allowed to drive the motorcycles. The other couriers did. I had to drive a car. And some kid came over and from the sidewalk by the bungalows and was, starting on me. And so then one of the, Dennis McLean, one of the huge copper who was a film courier, but he was in soft clothes. He came over and just leaned into the kid, and he had a gun in his shirt, and said, "What's up, kid?" And he just showed him the gun, and then the kid started screaming, and he's got a gun, he's got a gun, and so then the police came, and that the uniformed police, and then McLean sort of gave him a little what's for.
Now, in this case, this was a white kid.
Right.
Right. And
for sure.
In terms of when you said someone threw a rock at the police, again, this is one of the
white
white
kid.
kids.
Right, for sure. That it was sort of white on white in terms of the enforcement side of it.
Now, did you actually see the march go by?
I didn't.
You didn't, right?
No.
Now, Did I hear it right? There were two other riots that you had?
Yeah, that there were in the year before there was other unrest in which it was much more limited, but it was more. I think as the one I clearly remember is the more. I think the more Puerto Rican neighborhoods on the near northwest side.
Humboldt Park or something.
Right, and that there was real physical unrest and that kind of trouble before. But it was going in '68, it's hard to describe the time between 1968 and really 1971 in terms of the palpable racial tension of the city. And you would literally, it was always good to know where you were on the sidewalk for your own safety and protection, not racially, but just for, for bad guys. But there, in those times, you really had to pay attention. You had to spot, because the rage, I mean, there were people that would just punch through car windows because they're so angry. And you would see some brother coming down the street who's just on fire. I mean, just inside him, seething. And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to the other side of the street, so I'm not going to be the opportunity for him. But it's hard for people to believe that, but of how hot it was, and how mean-spirited it was, and how desperately poor the place was.
Sure. Now let's. Did you actually see the scenes of the riots in the West Side and?
Yes, I mean, no,
again?
in '68 I was gone.
'68 you were gone.
So I had left. I had joined the Army, and I was in a mountaintop in Germany, listening to August 1968.
Right. So back to Mayor Richard J. Daley. How do you think he responded to these challenges, the unrest and the racial challenges of the period?
Well, the unrest was just was clearly police, response. That was their job to do that, to stop this. I think on the West Side fire, when they burned down the West Side, still hasn't recovered. That I think that the use of force issue, the shoot to kill issue, is I think taken out of context and became sort of the conventional wisdom. That it was really Conless that was pushing shoot to kill and shoot to maim.
Police Superintendent
James Conless was pushing that, and that Daley didn't do it, but he was clearly infuriated by the fact that they were burning down his city, and I think that that's the key insight that they were, and it was. But if you knew what they were burning down. I mean, that was his city that he took such outrage against. These are some of the most desperate slums in the history of the city that had been there for an awful long time. And so, but he obviously hated it. And he hated, I think, the lack of control.
Another issue that ran through the period, clout. You talked about the influence of what you described as a circle that worked together. How would you define clout in Chicago?
I've really thought about it a lot since and I actually started to come up with a position that we may have as many forms of clout as the Eskimos recognize different forms of snow. But I think it is an informal relationship that allows for an individual to have access to favorable influence outside of the rule of law. So it's a separate, parallel universe to organized life in terms of...
Now, outside of the rule of law doesn't necessarily imply it's illegal, but it's just apart from that system.
Yes, I mean, I had a job in which we worked it perfectly legally, is that if you have access and entree and know who to talk to and what the rules are, you can move to the head of the class. And so that there are lots of ways in which perfectly legal things happen, but in a way that is sort of so carefree and easygoing and without a hitch that you have a great advantage. And so that there are all different forms of that. Some are dirty and some are clean.
Now, can you give us some examples of the exercise of clout, these different kinds?
Well, sure. You've got sort of direct clout, which would be Ed Burke. You've got also, which is he has the ability as the finance chairman to affect anything that comes along. By the same token, I'd say he would be a good example of sort of what I was calling look gee, no hands clout, meaning that he recuses himself. Okay, so there's an invisible form of clout. He's got a client that he brings along, and someone else, and it introduces a proposition before the city council, and then announces to everyone he's going to recuse himself because this is my client, and I'm not going to go on the record for voting for him. Now, if you don't vote for him, you're toast. Everybody understands that. They're sort of Kremlin rules. Okay, then you've got the kind of the warlord clouts of the various ward committeemen, and that they still have influence in lots of different ways. You have operational clout in terms of sort of the heads of the Park District or the Department of Aviation or other places in which large amounts of money are dealt out, but they also influence, who can get hired, who's going to get advanced, and those kind of things. You've got sort of the celebrity clout that is, if you're a big rich person or you are a show business or sports celebrity, you get clout. There is sort of the call your bluff clout, which is that tell them who you are. So there's a whole sort of class of the upper class, if you will, in the city that actually tells their kids, well, did you tell them who you are? And so they go into situation, I'm, such and such's, nephew, or I'm such and such's daughter, and people sort of collapse. They're not going to walk into the fight, and so they get what they want that way. There is lapsed clout, which is that, once you're gone in this town, really. Once you can't give anybody anything, you're nothing. There is really the sort of passive-aggressive or the appearance of clout, which is what I had in my job at World Business Chicago, in which they figure you're the mayor's guy, and so they'll cooperate with you and give it to you for free. Then there are those that are actual clout that are the mayor's guy, the samurais, the Terry Teals or the head of the CTA, the former head of the CTA. But there are others that have
Frank Kruse.
Frank Kruse, or then Barbara Kashala Kruse, who's the gatekeeper to the mayor, the scheduling director. So the list goes on and on. But there are all these different forms, and it really is, in my view, we have a culture of clout as Chicagoans, and so the way the Japanese sort of all bow and feel out their level of where they are in the hierarchy in their greetings, we do the same thing, and the difference is that for Chicagoans, there's always a transaction which is, if it came down to it, could I drop a bigger hammer on you than you could drop on me? And that's how we really define our relationship. So clout is hugely important in everything we do. It is our culture.